Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
I'm Anne, co-host of Transparency in Teaching, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and I am really excited today because I have a fellow student teacher supervisor on our conversation today. We're talking about tips to help you if you're a student teacher and you're having a college supervisor come in and observe you. What are some strategies to help you out to maybe calm those nerves so you're not so nervous when we come and see you, and some strategies to help support you during that. And then if you're a new teacher, so you're a beginning educator, kudos to you. We're going to be sharing about what you can do to whenever an administrator comes in and observe you, some things that they're looking for. The list is going to be a little similar, friends, but there will be some nuances to our conversation today. And today I have with me John Shenberry, and he's going to be sharing tips and strategies for new and student teachers when it comes to supervision. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm really glad to have you here too. Before we jump into our conversation, I'm excited for it. I know you are. We talked before we hit record. Can you please share a little bit about your teaching story? What brought you into education, and what's your current role?
Sure. So I always had an interest in education. My background before I became a teacher was international and public administration. And so I had the opportunity when I was working down in DC at international related think tanks and public policy think tanks to work often with our interns and to be presenting them or delivering professional development for them. And at the same time that I was doing that, Sam, I was also doing volunteer teaching on the county level with adults who were emerging English language learners and really enjoying that. So I had always had that interest in being a teacher, being a facilitator of training. And then it so happened that I had an opportunity to teach English as a secondary language in Japan. A friend of mine in graduate school had told me about the program. And for a year or two, I didn't do anything about it. But then I did ultimately apply. And I did get that opportunity. So having had that experience teaching English overseas, combined with, again, supporting adult learners and then supporting, our interns in the various organizations I worked in. When I came back from Japan, I made that pivot, full tilt into swerving into, the education field. And I went back for, I should say, my licenses in education, K-12 education. I did an alternate route program, so I didn't necessarily have to go back and do a second bachelor's degree, but I definitely was an interim teacher, and I was taking my courses at night while I was a teacher during the day, and the rest is history. And then from there, my career has been fully in K-12 education ever since.
Wow, that is such a cool story. It had lots of twists and turns, and traveling to Japan, uh, an alternative route for certification, and which I'm thinking, John, we might have to have you on the show again to talk about that process, because some of our listeners are second career teachers or career switchers, or obtaining a degree and doing an alternative route. So I think that might be another episode you might have to record in a little bit.
I would love it.
Awesome. So let's jump into our conversation today. First, let's start off with defining some of the vocabulary that we're going to use. So let's talk about supervisor. Friends, when we're talking about a college supervisor, this is somebody that's assigned from the college or university to supervise your student teaching. This person might come in and see you teach a few times throughout your placement, and they're going to give you feedback based on what they observe. An administrator is someone who might come in and observe you during your first year of teaching. They could also be called a supervisor too. So when we talk about an administrator in a supervisory role, we're talking about an administrator that's going to come in, observe you for a lesson or two during your first year, throughout your first year actually, and provide you with feedback and support in that way. John, is there any other terms you think we should define before we jump into our conversation?
I think those two are a good start. And if we end up using any jargon along the way, Sam, we could always explain that jargon then.
Well, two teachers talking, Ed, I think there's going to be some jargon involved today.
I think you're right.
So let's start off with our student teachers who are listening today. For our student teachers, let's say a lot of them probably started their placements, maybe they're 3 or 4 weeks in by now, and their college supervisor, all right, I'm coming in to see you teach on Monday at 8 a.m. We got the nerves. What are we thinking? What can we expect during a college supervisor visit?
Sure. So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit on that, Sam.
Sure.
Because as a college supervisor, a student teacher supervisor myself, through Brooklyn College, which is part of the city university system in New York, I actually do it a little bit differently with the folks I coach. Now, I can't speak to every college supervisor out there, but it should never be a surprise. So when you were saying, oh, I'm coming in next week, I hope that never happens in my class. I hope that I do give, my student teachers a little bit more of a heads up, and that it's also a conversation between the two of us as to when I am coming in, because they need to be preparing that lesson, right? So I want that lesson to be the most effective lesson it could be. So what I do with my folks is we usually will have a pre-conference where we will talk about the lesson that they want me to observe. So hopefully they'll come with their lesson plan at least partially filled out. The more the better, because that could really help us focus on what they want me to be looking at when I come in and observe. The other thing we usually do in a pre-conference is talk about where students are that they have. So are they collecting student achievement data? Do they have a student achievement chart? Well, that will then allow them in advance to figure out, okay, which of my students are below target for this particular lesson, which are at target and which are above, and what does that mean in terms of the differentiation I need to do as a student teacher in my class. So those are the documents we tend to talk about during the pre-conference. And then I will go in either in person, or they might submit a video to me, and we could talk about the difference between the two. What student teachers should be considering when they are also recording their video, because there is a difference, obviously, in what someone could see in the classroom and when something is just on video. And then there's usually a post-observation conference where, because these are student teachers, because I do not want to stomp on a dream in any way, shape, or form, we focus on the positives. We focus on these are 2 or 3 things you did really, really well. And here's one thing to consider as you move on in your teaching career. So that's how we do it at Brooklyn College in terms of setting our student teachers up for success when it comes to the supervisor visit. And then I would just add, Sam, that it's just really important to, when you're going to the classes that you have through, because we also have lectures. So it's a full class that students have with me. Really look at the syllabus and look at the topics that are being covered in the seminar class. So I could tell you, for example, we just recently started our second semester, and our first topic, I don't think this is going to come as a surprise to you, was classroom management. And then,
Ooh.
and then our next topic next week is going to be lesson planning and classroom or teacher dispositions. What are those dispositions you need to be a successful educator? So the
Nice.
more that student teachers can be really reflecting on not only their pre-conference and the post-conference that they have with their supervisor, but also the topics that are that are being covered if they're also in a lecture based learning environment,
Right.
to incorporate that into their lesson planning as well.
Let's go back to you had mentioned in a live observation versus a recorded observation of a student's lesson. So what are some things first that the student needs to be aware of when they're video or when when they're recording a lesson for you to give feedback on? And then after that, what are some things that you look for in a recorded lesson?
Yeah, so I know student teachers are really busy, they're nervous, but it's really important if you're submitting an observation via video to really make sure that that is a high quality video. Because I will tell you, Sam, there have been times where the person recorded them working with a small group in the middle of the cafeteria.
Ooh,
So it
a
was
little noisy.
it was very crazy. It was really hard to hear anything that was being said.
Mhm.
Another time, somebody recorded a video that was aimed at the ceiling.
Oh,
And so obviously I couldn't see anything that the students or the teacher was doing.
right.
Sometimes, especially during the mini lecture or the mini lesson part of a full lesson, whoever is recording the video is doing a pretty good job zoning in on what is on the screen or, what are the slides. But sometimes they could be a little blurry. So again, it's hard to see, for
Yeah.
example, what the learning objective is and what the students are actually doing and learning.
Mhm.
Now, I would say most of those are technical aspects rather than considerations of pedagogy. Now,
Right.
whether or not you are recording a video to be observed by your student teacher supervisor or your student supervisor is there in the classroom with you, there are some key things you should be considering in your lesson. And that is there a flow to your lesson? So lots of new teachers I work with are very comfortable or become more comfortable with the I do, you do, we model of
Mhm.
instructional practice. So, why reinvent the wheel if that's a safe, good model for instruction that works, at least as you're getting your sea legs,
Right.
on you. So is there a structure to the lesson? Is the teacher teaching from bell to bell with an introduction, a mini lecture, student practice time, and summary?
Mhm.
I mentioned before, is the teacher considering differentiation? Are
Yeah.
students ready for that lesson? I'd also add, is the teacher bringing in assessment,
Mhm.
ongoing checks on understanding throughout the lesson? And is there indeed student engagement? Now, whether that's student engagement, each individual student doing something, or whether that's small group, or even sometimes whole group discussion,
Yes.
has that been thought out? Is discussion just haphazard, or is there a rhyme and reason to it? So, those are some of the big things I look for. And I mean, of course, I look for classroom management.
Right.
Like I said, I look to see that students are engaged and that kids don't have their heads down on their desks.
Right.
If that's all in play, then I am also looking to see what the level of rigor is in the classroom. Is the learning objective a solid learning objective for that grade level? Is it of high rigor? Are we asking our students to do the heavy lift when it comes to cognitive engagement, not just hands-on engagement, but minds-on engagement? So those are some of the things I look for. And I'll be honest, Sam, those are some of the very same things I look for when I'm observing or that I tell administrators to look for
Right.
when they're observing new teachers or, dare I say, any teacher, regardless of how long they've been in the field.
Right. I mean, I think our listeners going to have to pause and rewind that whole section you had just shared. Lots of things to look for in a recorded and even a live lesson, especially that minds-on engagement. I thought that was a good one to share. Classroom management, managing student behavior, whether you're teaching small group or large group, looking through all those different types of pedagogies and methods, assessments. So you mentioned so many great things that you're looking for in a student teacher observation. And you've also said that a lot of these things are similar in a new teacher observation. Let's move into that crowd that's listening. What are some tips that you have for that group whenever they're being observed by an administrator? Is there anything different?
Yeah, I think it depends on one thing it depends on is whether or not they know the supervisor is coming in or they don't know the supervisor is coming in. So again, I do a lot of work with administrators, and it's always a mix of the teacher coming in to do a formal observation that's announced, a formal observation that isn't announced, and then how they're balancing completing all those formal observations, whether announced or unannounced, with walkthroughs, those informal daily
Yeah.
walkthroughs, right? So all of those situations are a little bit different, I think, in terms of how teachers should prepare. So let's talk about the formal announced
Yes.
observation.
Let's start there.
Yeah, let's start there because I know lots of folks are worried about that. Well, hopefully, whoever's listening, their school system does have a process in place if it's announced where there is a pre-conference with the administrator, very similar to what I discussed as to what I do with my student teachers, that there is a pre-observation, the observation, and then the post-observation. But
Mhm.
even if there isn't a pre-observation, obviously, if you know that your administrator is coming in on such and such a date at such and such time, there really is no excuse to not do your absolute best, to really give it your all, plan a fully functional lesson around those 4 parts of a lesson: intro, mini lecture, student engagement, summary. Consider what the learning objective is that's guiding all of that. Make sure it's academically rigorous. So bringing in perhaps the Hess's cognitive rigor matrix, which can really help you take a learning objective and increase the level of cognitive complexity, because everything in a lesson should draw from that learning objective.
Right.
Post that learning objective, discuss that learning objective with students, then go into your 4 parts of a lesson, teach bell to bell, make sure you get through the summary by the end bell. You want to get through all 4 parts of that lesson. And you want to make sure, like I was saying before, that you're showing your administrator that you are assessing for understanding. That could be through simple ways like cold calling or having students signal if they're understanding what it is you're teaching them. It is also about how you manage small groups and student-to-student engagement as well. So in addition to the assessment, what does student engagement look like in your class? Really make sure you're showing your administrator that there's engagement. And I'm a firm believer, Sam, that if you are designing effective lessons that are inclusive of best-in-class pedagogy practices, your classroom management should be better because your students will be more engaged.
Mhm.
Because, of course, your administrator is going to be looking for that.
Right, you have that
Now,
respect and rapport built in.
exactly. Now, let's talk about if it's an unannounced formal observation.
Oh boy.
You're really, as a teacher, whether new or otherwise, you're really going to want to take your cues from what the school professional development calendar looks like. So, what are you being trained in? What has your administration told you the big goals are for the year? Has the administration shared with you? Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. The school strategic plan. Have you looked at the vision and mission statement of your school? So what are those big lift items that your administration has prioritized in terms of what instructional practice should look like. So if you're doing those things on a regular basis, you shouldn't be nervous with the administrator coming in, right? Because you already will have a sense of what your administration, and hopefully the teachers as well, have decided are the necessary instructional moves to help students grow and achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other piece of that is the supervisor, I should say the administrator, informal walkthroughs. One thing I coach administrators on, Sam, is not just doing the dog and pony formal announced or unannounced observation, because also teachers know, even if it's unannounced, administrators do tend to do their unannounced observations in clusters, and word gets around. People just know. Exactly. People know when the administrator is doing those formals. So a good school administration does build time in to do those weekly informal 5 to 15 minute walkthroughs, because if you do have a rapport during that time with your administrator and they are sharing feedback, you should be using that feedback for the times they come back in more formally. I hope that makes sense.
That really does. And sharing the information about looking through your school's PD calendar and seeing what you're being offered and how you're implementing that was such a big eye opener for me. I'm so glad you shared that tip.
Yeah. Now, of course, again, teacher success is administrator success and vice versa. So administration has to have a good PD plan that is actually based on the needs of the students that are sitting in those seats right now. I would say a lot of the schools I coach in do have that, but not all of them do, Sam. So for a teacher to be successful, administration needs to pull its own weight as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. John, this has been a great conversation. So many tips and strategies were shared. I know for me, I want to try to implement the pre-conference with my students. I think that would be a lot of fun to help them prepare for an observation. And looking back, I think I also want to work with students on recording a lesson, but instead of me watching it, have them watch it and critique. Have you done anything with that?
I have started doing some of that. I'm
Any
not,
tips?
I'm not an expert at it yet. I'm a student on that journey as well. But I think that's very powerful, because sometimes in my coaching work, Sam, it's easy for me to suggest to a teacher or to say to a teacher, again, whether new or veteran, to say, oh, you did this really, really well and this really, really well. What about this? And unless they see it for themselves, they might not understand why I'm suggesting that, right?
Yes.
So I'm thinking of an example where I was working with this one teacher, very good at their checks on understanding, asking kids to really explain their responses, but they were more of that lecture-based whole class instructional teacher, right? They really weren't releasing their students as much. And I wonder if I was doing more with video like I am now, if it would have been easier for me to get that teacher to pivot how they taught, because they would have seen it for themselves. So
Yes.
I definitely think it's important for teachers to see themselves teach and to reflect upon that. I'm going to mention a great consultant for this.
Please.
Do look at the research, and I know he's all over LinkedIn and he's written many books. Look at the research by Jim Knight, Knight.
I was going to ask for spelling. Thank you.
Yeah, because I'm almost positive one of his books that I do recommend to the schools I coach is How to Coach with Video.
Oh.
And if you look online, you probably will find video of him modeling the process of coaching a teacher, having had them reflect on their own video.
Ooh, that's good. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm adding it to my Amazon list now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm almost positive it's gym night.
Awesome. Oh, that's going to be good for my practice, my own professional development, and to support my students too.
Yeah, and I mean Jim Knight's just a great coach overall. I just know that he's a big proponent of using video, and I agree. Like I was saying, the example I gave before, people need to see things for themselves
Yes.
for it to resonate and to understand why they might want to make a change.
Yes, and that it gives them that proof, oh
Eh,
yeah, now I see it. Now I see it. Oh, let's talk about how I can make that better.
right, and the more
That's
they're vested in it, I mean, we're talking more now about coaching rather than, let's say, an admin coming in and doing a formal observation. But the more a teacher's vested in a potential change, the more likely it will be to happen. Because as a coach, Sam, I'm in, I'm out, I recommend things. Maybe I get a chance to model.
mm,
Maybe I get a chance to co-teach. Maybe I do get a chance to look at a video with the teacher in our post conference, right?
hmm
But they're still the person that's going to have to make the change long term. And
right.
if they don't buy into it, it's only going to work as long as I'm working with the school. And as soon as I'm not working with the school, it's going to fall. That practice is going to fall by the
Yes.
wayside. So
Yes.
people have to be vested.
John, thank you. Thank you for all these strategies that you've shared today. I would love for you to take some time to share where my listeners can get in touch with you. Maybe an administrator's listening, they want to check out your coaching services. Can you please share a little bit about how we can continue the conversation with you after this episode?
Definitely. So I do have a LinkedIn profile. I'm very active in posting regularly on LinkedIn. So people can find me there. They could also read some of my longer form articles on the Work It Daily career job coaching site. And I also have my own teacher online courses through Teachable at Have a Life Teaching. So any of those, your folks can find me at any one of those locations. LinkedIn is probably the most direct.
Awesome. I'll make sure I put links to your resources and your LinkedIn profile in the show notes.
Thanks, Sam.
A-
Appreciate that.
Absolutely. John, this was fantastic. Thank you again for sharing all these strategies for student teachers, new teachers, and some of the administrators in the crowd listening, because I'm sure they picked up some great stuff. Thank you so much for your time. It was a lot of fun.
Likewise. Thanks, Sam, for having me.
Of course.
And there you have it, Edu-Magicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more Edu-Magic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram at sfessage. Until next time, you have the Edu-Magic within you.